So we are now online. It's the first streaming from the crypto bar in the center of Kyiv, and today we have our guest Moritz from Holochain.
Hey guys, I'm going to do a little intro to Holochain, which is a both pre and post blockchain technology. And so I'll give you a bit of context for where this is coming from, and then I'll go into the technical specification and what you can do with it. So basically the origin story of this technology is from even before Bitcoin existed, in the sense that this comes out of a much larger project called Scepter, which you can find at ceptr.org. And Scepter is basically an entire rewrite of the computing stack from top to bottom, literally to the point where you stop coding in terms of lines of text in a text file to semantic trees. Now, I know that goes over your head because you've never heard of this, but let's just keep it at that. And Scepter itself comes out of an even larger project, which basically combines the technology part called Scepter and the sort of social or consciousness part, if you will, of what it takes to build human and social systems that can make use of technology in a good and positive way. And so I like to think of this in terms of agency on the one side, as in people being able to act in the world effectively, and then technology, which I call extended agency or crystallized agency, that allows people to extend their agency into the world. And so with that sort of esoteric philosophical background, let's zoom down again into Holochain and talk about what it is, how it's built, and what it can do. So Bitcoin came around, of course, in 2008 when the white paper was released, and then 2009 when the software was first put out into the world. But the basic design for Holochain was already specified a couple months or actually years before that. It wasn't built yet, so we don't really have the credibility of saying we built it before Bitcoin, but the basic idea was already there. And the basic idea for Holochain is basically you combine Git-style hash chains with torrent-like DHTs and validation code, as well as some sort of just app code that specifies what you can do in an app. And so the way I've started to think about this just in the last couple of weeks while basically preparing an intellectually rigorous case for Holochain as the Linux of DLT, I've sort of started thinking about this in the following terms. Bitcoin tried to become an alternative to the legacy financial system, and it was motivated primarily by sort of anarchist political dreams of sidestepping the legal and financial frameworks of the world and giving people a capacity to directly transact financial transactions without a middleman, without anybody in the middle capturing that or corrupting it or withholding your capacity to do so. And it tried to achieve this with a specific technological innovation, but more so than technological innovation, it was an economic innovation, a game theoretical innovation. Because basically the fundamental computer science problem that Bitcoin was trying to solve is what I call distributed intrinsic data integrity, which means how do you have a bunch of data live out in the open among many different computers, servers, whatever have you, and have none of them be able to tamper with data after it has been authored. And so Bitcoin solved this not by really solving this computer science problem of how do you engineer data that cannot be tampered with, but instead it basically used the hash chain structure, batched updates to this structure into so-called blocks, hence the name blockchain, and then added a consensus mechanism, basically a way to guarantee that the computer that updates the entire database structure has to solve a very difficult mathematical problem first, sort of in a lottery of all kinds of miners, so-called miners, trying to solve this problem, and then updating the entire chain of these blocks at once, and then distributing that new updated block to everybody else in the network. And so this is a game theoretical economic solution because it makes it not computer scientifically impossible to tamper with the data, but instead makes it economically too expensive to attempt an attack, because you would basically have to take over more than 50% of the network hash power in order to really run an attack on the network and to change data, to capture transactions, to basically corrupt the entire thing. And so that's what Bitcoin did. It basically couldn't solve the computer science problem, and instead it solved it in an economic, game theoretical way. Now, fast forward to today, and the entire blockchain and crypto space has had this fantastic delusion of thinking that the only way that you can do crypto or cryptocurrency or even blockchain is by using that blockchain structure, is by using that consensus algorithm, that consensus mechanism of having every single thing of a crypto distributed system live in one database that all the apps that are building on top of it have to build on top of and have to make use of and pay for access for. And also to create cryptocurrencies that are token based, in the sense that they are either limited supply or deterministic issuance, in the sense that there is an issuance schedule that either increases up to a certain point or increases algorithmically forever. Bitcoin has a deterministic issuance schedule, but it also has a limited supply. It can only ever go 21 million Bitcoins. Ethereum also has a deterministic issuance schedule, but it doesn't have a limited supply. It goes on forever ad infinitum, and it goes sort of asymptotically towards zero, but never reaches it. And so Holochain doesn't do that. Holochain is basically an entire sidestepping of that problem, that whole space that has grown from the innovation of the blockchain in Bitcoin. And instead, it attempts to solve the computer science problem, the actual problem that needs to get solved in order for us to have the scalability, the speed, the efficiency, and the cost effectiveness, in a sense, of having a distributed computing framework that allows us to not have to pay a fundamental basic layer for making use of its world computer, but instead to have people build apps, have those apps have their own self-sufficient networks, and then for you to be able to bridge those apps to other kinds of apps, and to create this way an entire ecosystem, a mesh network, if you will, of interoperable, interdependent apps that can work well together, but also stand alone. And so the way we achieve this is by doing something very different than blockchain. We take Git-style hash chains, which is a very proven technology. Git has been around for more than 20 years now and works beautifully. We combine that with DHTs, which are distributed hash tables, which is also a proven technology. And if you've ever downloaded an illegal file, like an album or a movie, I certainly have, and I've actually been caught by the German state twice and had to pay money for it, then you know what I'm talking about. You basically go to a piracy website like the Pirate Bay, you download a magnet file, and then that allows you to torrent, i.e. to receive chunks of a particular file from other computers in this distributed network that also have that file. And so basically a DHT is a way to have a universal folder structure that doesn't rely on any particular device to be online at any particular time. And so we combine these two technologies together in the sense that hash chains form our fundamental data entry layer or database layer, basically, but not in a sort of universal monolithic sense where there's a central chain or a central blockchain where everything gets stored and everybody has to keep a backup of that. But instead, everybody has, per the app that has been created in the Holochain framework, has their own Holochain hash chain on their own device that they themselves author every single entry, every single action that they do inside the app to. And so then the DHT for us forms the social or distribution or propagation layer in the sense that now that you've authored an entry to your own local chain, your own local device, you need to, or you want to probably, some of those entries you want to have available for other people for viewing even when you are offline. And so basically we do that in the way that you author it to your chain, and then, for example, if you use a Holochain based Facebook clone, if you will, just as an example, you want to have people, your friends, to be able to view your profile even when you're offline. And so per app, we have the capacity for developers to specify the redundancy factor for every single data entry. So for example, my profile picture or my profile name or some entries or posts that I make on my profile, they might get first authored to my own chain, and then they might get distributed to, let's say, 15 other devices all around the globe that will keep a copy available at all times. And if any of those devices goes offline, the system automatically adds another backup somewhere else so that the redundancy factor never goes below the required number. And so this way you have a very self-propagating or an intelligent system of keeping content available, but not have it be replicated to an entire network of nodes in the network, which is incredibly time-consuming, not very cost-effective, not very scalable at all, actually. And so because we've made this fundamental technological shift, a very different architecture, which we call agent-centric rather than data-centric, which we call blockchain, you gain a lot in speed, in scalability, in efficiency, in cost-effectiveness, all of that. And basically, a Holochain app gets faster, gets more efficient, gets more scalable the more people use it. And so you have the inverse properties of a blockchain system, which gets slower, gets more difficult, gets more expensive the more people join it, which is not something you want in your system. And so with that sort of in mind, I'll give you just a brief glimpse into the last piece of the puzzle on the technical level, which is the app code that specifies what constitutes a valid set of actions within the app context. And then the way that an app actually functions is that, let's say you download the Holochain app and let's say it's a Slack type app, like a communications platform that allows you to chat with your friends or your coworkers or something like that. And so you download the app, you install the app on your own device, and then once you boot it up for the first time, it generates a Genesis entry on your own local hash chain that basically takes all of the application code, hashes it, i.e. runs it through an algorithm that produces a hash, which is basically a digital fingerprint that identifies this code. And then with that Genesis entry in place, every single action, every single entry you make to your hash chain subsequently gets validated against the rules that were hashed in the Genesis entry. And this way you're solving this computer science problem, because now whenever somebody tries to hack their own chain and tries to pass off an entry that they make to the chain as a legitimate one that isn't actually legitimate, they themselves fork themselves off into a different universe, if you will. Like they can't actually communicate with the original community because they now have different app rules that have allowed them to enter this entry to their chain. So this is basically just first the entry of new actions onto your own chain in a Holochain app. Now, let's say it's a direct message. So when you and I chat to each other, it's just between our two devices, and maybe we don't even want other people to back up that information, and so it's just between our devices. But let's say it's, for example, a marketing channel, because we are co-workers, and the marketing channel also includes other people or might include other people in the future. And so all messages in this marketing channel, #marketing, we send between us, and in that channel, which has its own distributed hash table as the propagation or social layer. And then that generates entries that are backed up to all the people who are in that marketing channel, and perhaps even to people who are part of the Holochain app, the Slack app in general. And that allows us to have other people who join a channel, for example, when all of our devices are offline, to be able to receive previous messages without having to get them from our offline devices. And so this is the basic way that Holochain works. And one more thing is that every single entry, not only that gets added to your hash chain, but also that is supposed to be uploaded to the DHT and distributed to other peers, also gets validated on the DHT level against all the valid actions that you can take within the app. And so there are multiple barriers to trying to pass off an illegitimate entry as a legitimate one. Additionally, you also have the capacity to specify and determine app-specific, what we call membranes. And membranes are basically just entry barriers, as in who do you allow participation in the app. one of the problems of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin doesn't really have participation barriers other than downloading the code and running a full node. Of course, you can also run a light client. And so because you can't really keep out bad actors, you have to err on the side of making it trustless or generating this trustless trust by basically creating this hugely inefficient but highly secure consensus algorithm that is highly expensive to run, such that attacks are virtually impossible. Which isn't even true in itself, because Bitcoin is basically run by 5 mining pools in the world that if they just were to go on a video conference and have a conversation, they could just shut down the entire network if they wanted to. The same goes for nation states who have superior access to incredibly cheap energy, and they could also run their own mining networks to take down Bitcoin. But that is sort of on the side. Now, with our membrane concept, you can specify, okay, in order for you to enter this application, you have to, I don't know, give a name or give an email address or whatever you want. It could be approved by the beneficial dictator of your group, or receive M of N signatures, or KYC, whatever you want. And so that is something that allows us to, one, control who enters a context of a Holochain app. But then once people are inside, and once they are inside and trying to do bad things, trying to run attacks on your app, there's another way that you can stop them from doing that. And it's basically by having what we call an immune system. You already noticed we're using a lot of biological language, and that's for the very simple reason that biology is the sphere of life, or the sphere of the world where trial and error has been happening over billions, literally billions of years. And so the patterns that biology employs to scale systems are very reliable to copy and to imitate and to gain inspiration from. And so we use a lot of biological concepts because that's the most, let's say, A/B tested pattern in the world. And so the immune system basically works by, when somebody uploads an entry to the chain that is not legitimate, and somebody else gets in contact with that entry when it has for some reason passed the validation on the hash chain of the attacker, and it gets uploaded to the BDHT, then they themselves run through the entire history of the attacker or of the person that they're checking, and check whether the entry agrees with the rules of the application code. And if it does, everything's great. But if it doesn't, then what they do is they publish to the rest of the members of this app, they publish what we call a warrant, basically a warrant or a warranty, saying that I found this bad actor, look, he's doing bad things, and here's his entry that he himself signed with his private key, so you can check yourself whether he did something that was wrong. And so every single other member of the network then also who receives this warrant checks the chain for themselves and doesn't trust the one that publishes the warrant, but checks it for themselves and validates the same thing, and they themselves then put their signature under that warrant. And so once a certain number of signatures has been gathered, depending on the app specifications, you can either kick them out, you can mute them, you can have them, I don't know, give up a let's say an amount of currency that they at the beginning gave in for skin in the game type stuff, whatever you want. And so you have configurable security that is self-enforcing without having to have people oversee it necessarily, but you can also, of course, integrate human or social processes of validation over and above the technological validation processes. So that was a lot of concepts, a lot of different ways of talking about a very complex, but I would say simple design, what we call an agent-centric architecture, because it is oriented about the individual people rather than about the sort of data layer with people at the edges. And so what can you use this for now? So the best thing to use this for is basically currency applications are very easy to use on it, very easy to build, and the pattern we recommend people to build within Holochain context is not one of token-based currencies where there's a sort of pot of gold, if you will, or sort of a limited supply of coins or tokens, and instead what we call mutual credit crypto accounting or crypto credit. And so this functions in a very different way from token-based currencies. Think just of double entry sort of profit and loss balance sheet accounting that every single company in the world uses. What you do is you have one side that is sort of liabilities and the other one is sort of outstanding debts that you are owed by other people, or sort of prospective profits. And so all the time within the company context, you have to have the positive be outweighed by the negative. And if the positive goes down, the negative goes up. And so it's always at zero in the entire balance, but there are different balance, sort of active balances in positive and negative. And so this same concept, we expand beyond the sort of confines of a company or corporate context to an entire network of actors that themselves are in this sort of double entry system where perhaps my account is in the positive, has a debit, or your account might be in the credit, in the negative. And then whenever we transact, mine, for example, goes down and your goes up. And so this is a very different way of operating currency, and it requires a very different way of thinking about it. But it offers a lot more flexibility and it's much cheaper to operate. And it basically makes currency less an object that I pass from me to you and more sort of language that we speak with each other and that we keep track of the sort of account balances as we go. And so that's one type of application. Other types of application include social networks. Literally, Facebook scale could run on Holochain without too much of a problem. You could have resource accounting. You could have legal systems. You could have basically everything that has a sort of social or techno-social component. Literally, IoT is very easy to operate. And so, yeah, if you're interested in this kind of system, technology, and you're wondering how to use it, I recommend you to go look up the article that I wrote about a year ago about Holochain called An Introduction to Holochain, a Post-Blockchain Technology, which you can find at www.unblock.net/introduction-holochain. And then from there, you're also welcome to get in touch with me, be that at my name as in moritz.bierling@holo.host, which is the company that I work for, which I should probably also explain just in a second. And then there's plenty of videos that I've also created, plenty of resources that are out there already. Our community is growing at an accelerating pace. We're very close to releasing the next alpha of our Holochain version. And now to round it all off, which I forgot to mention, because we realized that Holochain as a technology, in order for it to really become, like truly become the backbone of the distributed internet, the Web 3.0, that everybody is using, even with people, normal people, normies, if you will, not realizing that they're using crypto apps, we need to have a way for crypto apps to be accessible through the web browser, so that your grandma or your mom, who won't go to a GitHub to download a DMG, to install something, to put a command line thing somewhere, for her to be able to go to a URL, just type it in, or to download an app from the App Store, and to then use an app, do whatever the app allows her to do, which is something she likes to do, without even realizing she's using crypto. And so in order for that to be possible, we needed to build a hosting service very similar to Amazon Web Services, for example, basically a cloud hosting service. And so that is called Holo. And so Holo is basically our bridge from the new distributed web back to the old web of Web 2.0, of client-server infrastructure, of domain names, all of that shit. And so that will allow people to just type in a URL. It resolves to the crypto backend, but they're just interfacing with it through a normal UI. And so that's Holo. That's the company that we did a Indiegogo campaign for, where we sold Holo ports, which are our dedicated servers basically that you can purchase and put in your home, set up very easily, and then become a node in a distributed network of hosts and get paid for hosting work that you're doing. And then we also did an ICO last year in April, where we raised about 20 million at that point in Ethereum for an ERC20 token. that will get swapped once we launch our own internal crypto credit currency called Holofuel, which basically allows us to pay the hosts for the valuable service they're doing. And Holo and Holofuel with the ICO in the background, the Holo token, which has the ticker HOT, H-O-T, that one actually did a very good performance. We were actually the best performing ICO of 2018 of all of crypto, with 1,000% increase in value to the all-time high. And we're now hovering at about, I think, 8 times. And so now in the coming months, I personally expect, this is not a financial advice, but it's just my personal expectation, for the token to rise in value gradually as we release our actual hosting software, as the holoports are distributed to our network of backers, which will be happening in the next couple of weeks. I already have mine at home in Vilnius, Lithuania. And then for Holochain to enter beta, and just for everything to go from there. So that was a sort of short, but sort of long, relatively simple introduction to Holochain and Holo. And if you're interested in sort of even more background to that, I recommend you to check out Scepter and Metacurrency, scepter.org and metacurrency.org. And if you're interested, just get in touch. I'll be happy to refer you to other people, to resources, or to have a conversation with you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Moritz. Next time when you are in Kyiv, we can create like a bigger meetup with you, because this was happening spontaneously. But next time we'll invite like people from Kyiv crypto community, and we'll ask some questions. And so thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Moritz.